Hello everyone and welcome to Shifting Tides. Today I am so delighted and honored to bring to you Aurelio. Originally from Austria, he has now made his home in Auroville ashram in India, South India. He is lovingly called a visionary listener. He is a musicologist, an ethno-musicologist, educator, sound designer, a musician, and a sound healer. Let's welcome Aurelio. Good morning, Aurelio, and such a warm welcome to you for Shifting Tides.
Very happy to be with you. Very happy to be with you. As I said, I'm very happy to have this connection with the Ganga. It seems to be the flowing source of all the Indian culture. So I'm very happy to connect with it.
Absolutely. And that brings me to the point of Shifting Tides, because that's exactly what it represents, the tide of change, the tide of flow. So how would you interpret Shifting Tides vis-a-vis your life?
You know, I had spent quite some time. I ran away very early from Europe. I thought something was not right with the system, and set out to the furthest away place of civilization, and that was the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
And we know the Pacific Ocean covers a third of the planet, and there's some dots in the middle of it, of some islands. So I stayed on those islands, and growing up in Austria, we have no access to the ocean. We're in the middle of Europe, surrounded by all those countries, and then living on the oceans in the South Pacific, I was exposed to, the ebb and flow on the ocean. And that was very important to understand, because sometimes I came out to the beach and the ocean was all that way out there. And sometimes actually, you stepped into the sea and suddenly you had to be careful because there was no standing ground, because the flow was in. So I think actually for me in that context, I realized about larger rhythms, because then my interest came up and says, how do those tides come about? What makes the tides? Is it the movement of the earth? Is it the attraction of the moon circling around the earth? And then I think, because I was looking for something completely new and the unknown, I was out on an adventure, and then I realized, yes, things come, things go, problems come, difficult circumstances one has to face when one lives on the road. And I think now, looking at it, the whole of life is tides. It goes up and down, we go through different adventures, sometimes huge challenges, and sometimes we're at the bottom of the valley and in the thicket of it all. And then after some time we are rising to the new horizons, and we're up on the peak and we can overview everything.
Yeah.
So I think if I look back, actually my life's journey, it has always been like moving through the different landscapes of our life's experience. And I feel fortunate because I've been really through many landscapes outside. At that time in my 20s, it took me 5 years to travel one time around the planet.
Okay.
And I think that actually gave me perspective also to travel through the inner landscapes. And to realize that inner landscapes, we have the same, so you can get lost in jungles and swamps.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
I think that happened. And there are different phases and cycles to life.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like how I would say the tides.
Yeah, but it happened to you at a very early age. You said you were in your early 20s when you went around when you went around the planet. So was that a trigger to some kind of a challenge you were going through in life at that point? Or
Yeah.
did it kind of
Yeah.
happen much later? So would you like to share that with us?
I think my trigger in life came very early. I had very strong childhood asthma, starting with 3 years. So in my childhood, it was a bit tragic because I couldn't actually, each time when I got excited and I was happy and I was playing with friends, I possibly could enter into an attack of asthma, and then basically often I fell unconscious and I had out of body experiences. Or let's say, I mean, that sounds strong, but I remember often when I basically fell unconscious and then people were collecting me and they bringing me somewhere back into the house or something. I had this experience often. It was not uncomfortable. I basically was hovering above the happening.
Oh,
So while people were carrying me and the excitement and people were concerned because I was unconscious, I actually observed it from above. And I think that gave me, and then I had been in sanatoriums and hospitals for sometimes half a year in
Oh
my
my God.
childhood. And through this one, I basically was interested in how to overcome it. So when I was about 14, I think it was 14 years when from a missionary newspaper, they had a series on Hatha Yoga and Pranayam. So that's
Okay.
when I basically started my yoga journey.
Okay.
And I think those experiences, so I always had kind of a little bit this observing, witnessing space in my childhood. I looked at the circumstances and I always wondered what went wrong in the system, where's the origin of humanity, why are people not happy while they have everything materially, why are people fighting. I grew up in a Roman Catholic context, and there was this kind of like everybody had to go to church and show up, you had to be registered by the community, but at the same time there were fights everywhere and manipulations and political games, and I always felt like, hey, what's going on? Why is there not the sincerity? Why are people playing double games and all of that? And that's what I felt, and that's where I think that was my call of setting out in one way, looking for the origin of humanity. I think I was looking for lost paradise.
And when and how did you land in India? I mean, how many years later after you discovered yoga, how many years later did it take you? How many years did it take you to actually come to India
You
then?
know what? I had a small intermezzo. I went to a gymnasium baccalaureate, and then actually I had some relatives. It so happened that somebody in the family married with somebody in Pakistan, and so when I was 19, actually, I made this examen, and that was already late in May. That's when the examens are in Europe, May, June.
Yeah.
And that person got impatient, so we drove a car from Vienna to Lahore, Pakistan.
Oh, I see.
And I was
Okay.
19 years old, basically. So I came on this overland journey through India, and at that time entering India was very beautiful because from Lahore you took a bus, and then you walked through the no man's land from the Pakistan border to Indian border. And that's how I entered India. And I was 19 only, you know what? I was there in the Golden Temple in Amritsar. There was this amazing welcome. It was like entering a different world. It was in the late 70s, no? And then I think I jumped on a train, went to Delhi and wanted to see the Taj Mahal. It was the time of young love.
Yes.
And that's what I did, and traveled in unreserved second class apartment. It was crazy. It was the real India experience at that time.
Wow.
And then actually, how to say, through that experience, which was like, I think even I couldn't comprehend it fully. It was so different and so powerful. But then I went back to university in Vienna and I studied for 1 year. I wanted to enter ethnology, music ethnology. I was interested in original cultures. I said, if the Western culture is one expression of the human civilizations, I was much more interested what were those original cultures. And then I had to go in university, for the humanistic studies, we had to study Latin. And I was 1 year on university, and then I said, no, I'm not sitting here and learning about the cultures, I have to go out. And so basically then with 20, I think it was 20, when I left Europe, and I set out, and I thought I would be out for 3 months, but it took me 5 years to return to Europe. And I was just actually, it was in one way, it was really circling the planet. And I think what I always said then, I said I ran away from university, but I studied in the universe. Because it
Yes.
gave me an
Oh,
amazing, I
that's
was
such a lovely,
overlanding. Yeah.
that's such a
I was
lovely way
traveling
of putting it
overland.
out.
And I heard you were backpacking on the east coast of Australia also, no, at
Yes,
one point. And you
yes,
know what
yes.
it means to live on the road for months. I was in Australia for more than a year. I traveled through the inland, I stayed with Aborigines, I ended up in cairns and things. And then finally, actually, I ended up in Papua New Guinea. And I crossed the jungle on foot. And I remember when I was in this missionary station, the last outpost of civilization, the priest there said, you cannot go in there, you know, they are headhunters, they will eat you and all of that. But I was in such an adventurous spirit that I said, no, no, let me see. And of course, you know, then after a day's walk, then meeting the first people with bow and arrows and kind of like half
Yeah.
naked, it was a big adventure. And there actually, I think, how to say, that's where my adventure, of where I also had to confront the depths and the shadows and the dark side of creation, because I had severe malaria. I had two kinds of malaria in the middle of nowhere. It would have taken 2 weeks to go to the next health stations and things like this. And so I carried that, how to say, for a few years. I had to struggle with it, you know, recurring fevers and all of that. So for me, actually, it seems that sickness, and I had kind of like everything what you can have in the tropics, you know, yellow fever and jaundice and typhoid, and all those things, I think they were for me always the necessary dips into the complete unknown and uncharted territory.
And is that when sound actually came to your rescue? Is that when it happened, or much later?
Yeah, very good question. Of course, I had some classical guitar in school, so I learned Western music. And in my teenage, I grew up, music was very important. You know, it was the time of the protest songs, Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and all the
Yeah.
singer-songwriters. I grew up with all that music of the 60s, basically. And but you're right, actually, the deep touch with sound came in being with indigenous people. I
Okay.
was in Fiji Islands for long in the interior, and then with Aborigines in the interior of Australia, around Ayers Rock in reservations. And then in Papua New Guinea, I had some very deep experiences where we've been out from the village, how to say, you know, clearing the forest and planting some of the plants, agriculturals, slash and burn agriculture. And at that time, somebody broke its leg in the middle of, again, in the jungle, and we were away 3 hours from the village, basically. And that was such a powerful experience, because the person was in excruciating pain and shouted and cried. And then, you know, what you do when there's no hospital or no medical care around. So
Yeah.
all the people, we were a small group of maybe 9 people out there on the fields, and they came and they used the twigs of the trees to make sounds, you know, they created rattling sounds, white noise sounds, which suddenly calmed that person completely. And so
Oh.
that was for me, I said, wow, how did that happen? And so I had a few very mysterious experiences with rainmaking or stopping the rain through chance. And I was like, you know, I was in my early 20s and I said, hey, how is it happening? How is it going? How are they
Yeah.
doing it? What's behind it? And that, I think that quest basically set me out on the journey. And then being in Indonesia, where in Bali, where there's in the 70s, where there's much more, it's culturated, you know, they have
Yeah.
rituals, they have ceremonies,
That's
and
right.
seeing the power of the gamelan and the rituals and the gongs and the trance dances, And then I stayed on the same journey actually. I came into China, which was just opening in 83, 84. China opened for the first time for individual travelers, and I stayed up in Yunnan province, you know, in the border
Yeah, yeah,
provinces
yeah.
with the minorities. There's so beautiful minorities up there north of Burma and Thailand. And there again, music had such an amazing role, basically from the birth, when a baby was born in the village or in the household, music was there. And on the other side, when somebody passed away, again, music was there to help in grieving processes. And by the time I came back, how to say, after 5 years traveling to Europe, I had this strong urge to understand it. I wanted to study it. I wanted to understand what are the principles behind it. Why does music have such a strong impact on our emotions, and what's its capacity to help us to go through emotions and to go through difficult phases and depressions. Music is such an amazing helper on the way, no?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And over the years, you have experimented with so many products in creating different instruments. You've used wood, metal, bamboo, seeds, shells, and all of this. What is that one such element, one such product which you resonated most with?
You know what? The first thing was strings, because when I came back to Vienna, I had the good fortune that Vienna housed the world only Institute of Harmonic Science,
Yeah,
which was basically an institute reconnecting to the Pythagorean school. The Pythagorean school so that's the origin of our tradition, of the European tradition, the Greek tradition. And basically, Pythagoras was sitting over the monochord and tried to understand music. It was also on the verge of the mystic age into the rational age. And he basically explored the mathematics of music,
okay.
the mathematical principles in music. And from then on, basically, we have this story of the music of the spheres. I think he had an experience of the music of the spheres, of the harmony of the world. He had a deep spiritual experience, and then wanted to understand it and dissect it. And so that was an entry for me. It was through string instruments.
Okay.
And when I had returned back to India in 85, I had learned with a Hindustani singer from Aladdin Khan tradition. There was a connection to that high tradition.
Okay.
And so the tambura had its magic, because the tambura had this buzzing sound, this very typical sound which
Yeah.
which actually leads the string into an infinity. The sound stays resonant. So when you see what would be the one element, I would say it's resonance. That even if we finish plugging the sound or we made a movement, that the resonance continues.
Yeah.
And the sound is still there.
Yeah.
And I think then what happened, I looked into, through ethnological studies, I looked what was the origin of music making in humanity. And I put myself into the spaces. We even looked into, I was working with some behaviorists who worked with primates, with the langur monkeys. They lived with them in houses, and then we said, what's the beginning? Where did music making start? So, and the attraction to return to India was, in whatever I studied, I came across again and again that concept of Nada Brahman. The world is sound, which is there in the Indian Shastras.
Yes.
And so basically I said, I have to come and I have to explore the secret of it, the origin of it.
Yeah.
And in that way, which was interesting, what changed at that time, as I had been looking more at the origins of humanity and wanted to find this original life ending up in Stone Age, which was quite extraordinary, that it was still accessible,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had my I had my times where I lived naked for months
Really?
in a few different places in the world, on the ocean, in the forest, and all of that. So I went
Oh,
myself through this
wow.
very primal experience.
Yeah.
But then actually, through one teacher, he said, well, one cannot go back into the past, one has to go into the future.
Hmm.
And that's where, for me, uh, the calling to Auroville came into the picture,
Yeah,
and
that
the
was my next,
philosophy
yes,
of Sri Aurobindo,
yes, that was my
who is
next question.
basically the seer of the future. You know,
Hmm.
he uh, he brought in the evolutionary concept into spirituality.
Yeah.
That we are not a finished product as a species, but the species is further developing. And so that brought me to Auroville, that
Hmm.
whole vision of the evolution of the human species. And in Auroville, then basically everything turned upside down. Yeah. And
Yeah.
suddenly I was called into the future. I think I had my time of going back into the past, and suddenly the future became much more interesting.
Hmm.
And through that one, how does it then this whole exploration started into different sounds, new sounds,
Yeah.
and maybe also that movement away from music per se in all its different wonderful expressions, which we have the diversity of human music making.
Yeah.
It came more to the principles of music, and so we speak about sound work, the work of sound, and the
Hmm.
work with materials, and how matter basically has a capacity to resonating.
Yeah.
That's how this whole work came in, working, exploring all different kinds of materials,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
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 when
that
did,
actually helped. Yeah.
yeah, and when did Swaram come into place? How did Swaram happen at
Exactly.
Auroville?
So, you know, that was a big surprise because most of the people coming to Auroville come for this future perspective.
Yeah.
And then with my ethnological background, I said, why is the seed of the future planted in this specific soil of Tamil Nadu? What
Hmm.
is the fertility of the land? And so I was very interested into Tamil culture. And then
Okay.
when I found out Tamil culture has ancient relationships even to Africa,
Hmm.
and the Dravidian language family in contrast to the Aryan language family. And so for me, actually, that was very surprising uh, to come in contact. For many years, I was almost in this love affair with Tamil Nadu, and I did whatever I could do in anthropological studies and find out that academically there's not much known about South India. Our image of in the west of India is basically the North India, the Himalayas, the Ganga,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
rishis, the yogi tradition, and South India has something different to offer. It's tropical, how to say, it's a different climatic region.
That's right.
How it's the climate is so the climate relates maybe more to the Pacific oceanic climate,
Mm-hmm.
and through those studies I came in contact with the Siddha tradition,
Okay.
which is a very interesting, uh, how to say, field in Indian studies, very differently from what we know from the yogic northern traditions.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And then I created a cultural center exploring the local culture. And
Okay.
out of this one, actually, this was very interesting. So I used all our sounds in theater.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I created this cultural center, I got in contact with the dire circumstances in the rural villages
I see.
of local surroundings. And then out of this one, because there were 65% unemployment at that time, and then I created Svaram as basically as a development project for youth at risk.
Okay.
And that's how
Okay.
it happened. And it was interesting because I carried my research with me. And then there was this amazing talent of the local young people.
Hmm.
And suddenly my research got grounded. I had to apply it. Yeah? And it was not
Wow.
only kind of like things I carried around and academic studies. I had to apply it. And through this interface, basically, I say, of Western design, consciousness, academic studies, and the local talent. That's how Svaram was created, and we're very successful, I think, because of this meeting ground. And in that way, it's almost a fulfillment for me, all my search into the past of indigenous cultures. And then there's impetus into the future of humanity and consciousness studies. And Svaram is basically a product bringing those two things together. And that's why we are thriving, we're a very creative hub, and we are constantly finding new things. It's a very fertile, exploratory field.
Excellent, excellent, brilliant. It really sounds so creative and interesting. So tell me, Aurelio, you've been through this whole wave, this gamut of exploring spirituality and human consciousness at so many levels, in so many different places. Starting from being raised in a Roman Catholic environment and now being in India and studying the Siddha tradition. What has this journey been like, in terms of your own personal evolution, development, especially on the spiritual side? How would you be able to put it in words? I mean, what has been your personal, this excites me a lot to know the answer, because I've also been seeking all my life. But I haven't really made such huge, massive jumps and changes like you have. That little I've heard from you. So how has it impacted your personal journey, personal, thought process and personal sense of being?
I know that's your emphasis, that the personal side to it. You know what, I feel actually I'm just a part of a general, when you talk about shifting tides, I feel like humanity is in a shifting tide.
Yeah.
And that's why all those personal stories, they reflect the shift of humanity from an old paradigm in something new and unknown. I think for me, I feel blessed actually in this journey. I had different possibilities of aligning. I was very close to a Sufi lineage when I was in Europe. I was with Vilayat Khan, the son of Inayat Khan, who was this musician, for amazing, beautiful souls, that whole family. And again, I had been practicing Buddhist meditations.
Okay.
I've been in different traditions, but nowhere, actually, I felt like I didn't want to limit myself. I was in front of initiations. And then each time, actually, I remember one time I was even lining up for the initiation, and then 3 people before me, I stepped out of it. Because I felt like I cannot belong to any club. It's too narrow. But then that's what I'm saying. For me, coming in contact with the integral vision of Sri Aurobindo and the synthesis of the East and West, because Sri Aurobindo was educated in Cambridge and had to re-find his Indian roots. And then Mira Alfassa, who has Turkish Egyptian origin and was initiated in the Kabbalistic Western occult tradition, they are coming together. For me, it laid out the whole gamut and perspective of all spiritual traditions. And we had some amazing old sadhaks in the ashram, like MP Pandit, who basically always, every week, he would talk to us of all the different spiritual traditions of humanity, even the shamanistic traditions.
Wow.
And so for me, Auroville basically, as it is not, I think it's a space of where we realize we all have our own singular journey into it. We are entering the spiritual age. We don't need to belong to any, religious denominations. We are on a spiritual search, which is purely individual.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is usually, so what happens then in the spiritual journeys where we all follow our own calling, through basically the individualization prepares us for this inner search and realization of our life's purpose and all of that.
Yeah.
But often we still can be isolated, or we join a little club of like-minded people. For me, being part of this integral community is like I'm part of humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm moving with those tides of humanity through its changing processes. And personally, when I said everything turned upside down for me in Auroville, what I wanted to say is, up to that point, I thought all the spiritual, all my aspirations went to come to the origin or a place which is untouched by the vicissitudes of life. Yeah. But then, when I say upside down, actually, so it was always in this a path of ascension. Ascension into purity, into origin, into being above it all, witnessing it, not being detached of whatever is happening in life. But then actually with the integral approach, it means the key sentence is all life is yoga. All possibilities, all circumstances in life can be an opportunity to become aware.
Yeah.
And so suddenly for me was, I shied away. The last thing which I ever wanted to do and was interested was money matters and business. I stayed in monasteries, I stayed in caves, I lived in the jungles, I lived in the mountains and all of that. And now I'm running basically a successful international brand unit with 50 people employed. And I'm directing it. And so in one way, how to say that, it was not easy. My resistance against Excel sheets and organizations, because I was in a different space, since childhood. But then realizing that the yoga gives us this where our weak points are. So that was interesting. In this process of coming to Auroville, I had to work with lots of things where I had resistances. I had resistance to pragmatics. When those machines broke down, it was a headache, and who wanted to deal with it? Because I wanted to read the scriptures and do my yoga and my practices. But then I had to realize how to say that broken machine or the puncture in the tire on the bicycle, this was that moment of a possible realization. And so I like that. I had spent quite some time in Japan over the last 10 years. It's almost like this Zen approach. In Zen actually, the beautiful thing, any craft, let's say the tofu maker or the paper maker or tea ceremony, that concept that the spiritual experience and the presence and the recognition and those deepened and heightened moments of awareness, they can happen in any situation and they can happen in any activity. And that was for me, oh my God, it was such a beautiful healing, because then the separation between the inner life and the outer life, it melded, it fused. The separation, I've been in meditation Buddhist retreats for 1 month and 6 weeks, not speaking, silent retreats, and then coming out of it and confronting all the noises of the world. And so I basically suffered between that separation. I could not find this inner longing expressed in my outer surroundings. And this is for me a gift in Auroville in one way, that there is no separation between the inner and the outer, and the spiritual practice and the everyday life. So that's personally where I really went through a completely turnover, upside down thing.
But then finally, as you rightly said earlier, that you were looking for a paradise on earth. So have you found your piece of paradise?
So that was a rough awakening. So I had chosen this one island in the Pacific where I projected the paradise. So already I arrived hitchhiking on a boat from San Francisco to Tahiti. And then the first thing I saw in the tourist shop were pictures, beautiful colored pictures of this atomic bomb, test in the Tuamotu atolls. And I said, oh my God, this is the most beautiful place in the world, and here they are testing the atomic bombs. And then when I arrived on the Marquesas Islands, and they were so beautiful, like wild horses, you know, from the old pirates set out there, roaming over the hills and below the blue Pacific Ocean. And then when I stayed in that village, most of the people were infected with elephantiasis, you know, with those large limbs. And there was heavy suffering through sandflies and mosquitoes. So then I realized, no, paradise, it's not happening nowadays. Outside, yeah?
Yeah.
And I realized then, of course, that pushed me to the inner journey. Yeah, I cannot find it outside. There's a compromise everywhere. I think, I mean, Auroville is quite an extraordinary place because it had been a savanna desert, changed through land restorations and 5 million trees planted. So it's a little bit of an oasis, yeah. From the circumstances and from the way of life, we can live according to our inner rhythms.
Yeah.
There is no coercion, there is no ambitions, we don't have to run after the money. We can live to unfold what is there from inside.
Yeah.
Which doesn't say that we don't have any problems. We have huge problems. The mother said we, how to say, Auroville is like we bring together in this transformation all the impossibilities of humanity. And I had always this image, we're all thrown into this cauldron, and the divine Shakti is kind of like churning this soup of transformation. And you know, sometimes we dive under and we hit the bottom of that cauldron.
Absolutely.
Or we get, you know, we are there in the broiling oil and in the heat of the chili input and the whole samba, you know, we are there and we lose ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think paradise in such a sense that there is a place on earth where we can live the dream of unfolding according to an inner dimension, to an inner movement. And I think Auroville offers that. And it's actually only a model. I think many, you know, in the 70s, when we had this movement from everywhere in the West where people went back to the country, back to nature, all this movement of communities, how to say, that had a touch of it. But one special thing of Auroville, I think, is that we are not doing it for ourselves. This place is created as a laboratory of evolution and as an experiment in human unity. The city, the earth needs, so we are at the service. I think that's a crucial understanding, and I think actually paradise is coming when we realize we are just a small part of a larger whole, and there's so much fulfillment if we can serve that larger whole.
That's
what
right.
you do, for instance, with this series, no, you're serving coherences, convergences, communications that we realize together, hey, there's something happening, there's an amazing shifting tide upon humanity. It expresses itself through our own individual roller coaster rides and depths and all of that, but through the witnessing of it and the learning about it and mastering possible it, you know, the different movements of life and the challenges, in that one we can be at service for the larger whole.
Absolutely.
And I think that's for me part of paradise is caring for each other. We have been a few hundred years in this industrial revolution and, you know, individualization. Everyone has to fight for his own survival. We all have to make it on our own. And I think that's part of the big trauma now in the Western society about isolation, insulation, depression and all of that is because we went so far in the individualization process, which has its function to meet the inner core of the being, but somehow the next step is that we serve. And then we open to humanity and to community again. And that's where we can create paradise on earth.
Yeah, and actually that's the need of the hour today, all around the world. That's the need of the hour.
Yeah.
That all of us have to join hands, put our heads together, and really think of ways how we can help the other, how we can expand or extend our skills, our respective skills and talents, and to be able to serve as many people as possible, because that's what the world
Yeah,
needs
and
today.
it's not even out of an, I think it's not even out of an altruistic
Yeah,
motivation.
yeah,
We have to help because I have something. I think it comes more out of the understanding and the realization that I'm just a part of the whole. And even if you're there, we are communicating, but we are participating in the same earth body.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
we're participating in the same materials. We're participating in the same energetic spaces, in the mind spaces. If you think what happened over the last 2 years in the pandemic crisis around the world, how strong, how to say, the anxiety of the mind is there. Yeah, and we're sharing those spaces globally. So how can we transform those spaces? Can we bring in different narratives in those spaces?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely,
and
absolutely.
in that way, how to say, that's where the adventure, I think I realized I've been many years in isolation in the mountains when I returned from my journeys. I lived in the Alps and I haven't seen people sometimes for 3, 4 months. I didn't speak with anybody because the valley was snowed in. Yeah. But I had to, and I thought, this is it. Life is like, is so beautiful this way, in isolation. But I think in isolation, it might be a growth phase, but eventually we are social beings.
Yeah.
I think the human race is actually being of togetherness, and that's, I think, where a big important shifting tide has to happen. We're not on our own, and I think we are realizing it, moving into this global civilization. We're there together, and we
Yeah,
have to figure it out and manage how we can share the limited resources of
exactly.
water and
Yeah,
the minerals
yeah,
and the food and stuff like
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Because we are
So
all
we
going.
only can work it out together.
Yeah, because we are all. This is the time in history when the entire humanity is going through just a problem which is similar. We all are going through the same problems, and we've got to, like you rightly said,
And,
we've got to put our resources together to make the optimum use of what we have. You know, yeah,
and the blessing for me here being, how to say, in Auroville, and maybe being inspired by this vision of the future evolution of humanity, I think that's for me a blessing because I have perspective. I know where it can go. I mean, Sri Aurobindo in his major philosophical work, he talks about the life divine. And he doesn't speak the life divine is somewhere up in heaven. No, it's possible here on earth. So what does that take? And
yeah,
you know what for me was one of the most crucial images I got and why I came back to Auroville basically, that image which he gave, what we said, as far as we are away from the primates and we are here as this only a transitional being, the same distance, there's this new being in front of us. Yeah. And we have way to go to actually come into that possibility of a life in harmony, in peace, and in understanding and in wisdom and compassion. Yeah, we are morphing, we are a transitional being. We are still half, if you look what's happening on the planet, we are half animality, no, still. But there's a promise of a perfected being. And this, I think for me, it's an immense relief to have that perspective.
yeah,
And it's not in that way. The great thing is here with Sri Aurobindo, it's not about a religion, a new religion or something. It's just a perspective. I think he was like an evolutionary seer. And he was not a religious person. He was basically a poet and a literary person. He was exploring things. He was a science of those possible
yeah,
evolutionary changes. He was a scientist. And so the great thing now I'm feeling I'm home. And I'm home in a space which just gives me an amazing, promising, hopeful perspective of the future of humanity.
yeah,
And which doesn't say that we will have to go through possibly severely challenging times over the next decades. But that perspective is longer term. Might be a few hundred years, but we
yeah,
have it, and somehow the phase is there, and almost the knowledge is there. It will be happening. If it's in 1,000 years, but humanity, it's not on its dead end. we have an amazing adventure journey in front of us.
Yeah, yeah. And also at Auroville, I've heard that I haven't seen it yet. You've created this beautiful sound garden, where you have put your instruments and you have merged it with all the natural elements. So would you be able to share a little about that? How did that come about and what does it do to people?
Yeah, yeah. We have a little clip which we hope that we share with you and you can take
Okay.
a look at it. I think you know what the exploration of sound basically starts with the awareness of listening. And that was for me another crucial element on the journey when one of my teachers from this Pythagorean school, he said, we've been focusing over the last 2000 years since the change from the matriarchat into the patriarchat basically into visual perception. And the visual perception helped us to define the polarity of the brain hemispheres, yeah, and created that. And so through this one, he said, actually, we have to reconnect to the feminine sense, receptive sense of listening. And I think my journey into listening, it's the first thing is listening to nature.
Yeah.
Listening to the forest, you're listening to the Ganga flowing, you're listening to the rains in the monsoon, you're listening in the morning, and that listening basically, how to say, creates the foundations for our sound exploration. And out of this one, we first basically, we created instruments, yeah, to play, instruments which everybody can take in their hands and play with them. There's no knowledge necessary, it's sound. Then we came into healing modalities, using our instruments for kind of like for relaxation, for immersion into sound, and we created the sound healing space, which we call sonorium. And then out of this, how to say, of the protected inner sphere and working with the interiors and balancing and harmonizing it, the next natural step was, what can we do in the environment? How can we create more listening awareness in the environment? And that's how we came up with instruments for parks, and we created some sound discovery paths in forests, usually in the hospitality wellness sector, yoga centers.
Yeah.
I was 2 months ago, I was in the Maldives, and we basically participated in the creation of one of the foremost retreat islands in the world, which amazing, all the different healing modalities, and we brought our sound healing space there and the sound discovery path.
Wow.
And I think what it does, we have the sound garden here in Auroville also. We have many people coming to visit it. It's so beautiful when you see, how to say, people from all walks of life, everybody becomes a child. With playing music, you touch those instruments, you get this sound back. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts of playing with sound, is to touch that inner child, the innocence of it, that the discovery spirit, completely authentic movement. What is this wonderment? That feeling of wonderment. And I think this is at the core of our human existence. No, we are here as discoverers, adventurers.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why you're rightly called a visionary listener. Yeah.
Yeah, it was difficult to describe. No, it means listening. People say always, I'm looking forward to meet you and all of that. I'm always wanting to say, yeah, I'm listening ahead to meet you.
Yeah.
But then I said, no, listening happens in the moment. Listening it really brings you into the moment. No?
Yeah, yeah. And Aurelio, you have been dabbling with sound in so many forms for so many years, such a long time. What is that one spiritual practice which you do on a daily basis, which is non-negotiable?
Very good. Thank you for this essential question, because I think that what manifests spirituality is a practice.
That's
We
right.
call it a sadhana,
Yeah.
a daily practice. And so I'm basically following, that was my search, a tradition which we could call Nada Yoga. It was more an esoteric tradition, and it took me years actually to come in contact with some practitioners and the Shastras. And so the practice is twofold. One part of it is reception, pure listening,
Yeah.
how to say, listening without preferences. Yeah, you could almost say it's a practice like vipassana, observing through listening, listening into the body, listening into the environment, and observing oneself in the listening process.
I
Yeah,
see. Yeah.
and that's one part of the practice, and the other essential practice, which is amazing because it's so simple and so effective, is out of the listening. We call it then Nadupassana, manifesting the nada, being with the vibrations, is toning. And the primal form of toning is humming. Yeah? So humming, basically coming in context, if I'm feeling, how to say, all the cells of my body, I'm in contact with my body, and then generating vibration. And so for me, this practice basically brings together the introspective nature of receiving and the expressive part of our nature. Yeah? And what I'm expressing is wholesome vibrations. When I'm humming first full of goodwill into my system, full of harmony, charging my system with this harmony, and then the humming can extend in compassion to dear ones or to people in need. I can, with the sound, I'm able to project positive vibrations. So sound is more like a carrier wave. So that's at the core of the practice. And it's so beautiful because it's laid out in the Indian traditions of classical music. You want to explore or enter the magic of Indian classical music, you spend 1 year, at least 1 year, and establishing your sa, your fundamental vibration. And I heard that in '85 when I was working with this teacher from Alauddin Khan, Gharana. I went back to Europe, to the mountains. I had my tambura with me, and I think it must have been 2 years that I was singing on one tone. You know, to the point where everybody thinks, you're a bit nuts, or what are you doing? You know? But it goes deeper and deeper because one explores, and sometimes you go through boredom, and you think, why am I doing this, and how idiotic is it, and stuff like this. But if you made this determination and you think this is what the sadhana is at this moment, you go through it, and then you have breakthroughs. We cannot create them. It's the same in Zen, in sitting. We sit and are open and are concentrated and are focused. But Satori, it happens when it happens. We cannot pre-program it. We cannot want it. Maybe the more we long for it, the more we push it away. It's just this openness. And I think what's beautiful in the Nada Yoga tradition, I think again, there are ancient traditions which possibly I'm saying for the sake of another word. It goes back maybe to primal original times of humanity, to matriarchal times. So it's more like a receptive voice. Sri Aurobindo, for instance, he didn't give any practices per se. There's no Kriya practices which we have to do in yoga. His practice was being open, being receptive, having an aspiration, and surrender to that flow. And maybe the last thing in that one, what I'm saying, there's this beautiful image from the Vedas. Saraswati, the inspiration, she is this descending flow. Like the Ganga comes from the Himalayas, and I cannot pull that river. I can possibly channel it. I'm just receiving it. I'm open to it, and so I think that's crucial in the integral approach. We are more open, as you said. Everything is changing on the planet. Maybe we are in front of an amazing shifting tide in evolution of humanity. And we have this image that there's a new energy coming upon the planet, yeah, or a new level of consciousness opening it, and we are just opening towards it.
Yeah.
So we are not preoccupied with doing it and mechanizing it and formalizing it and making out of a technique or a religion out of it. We are practicing more, I think, a receptive poise, a poise of surrender.
One last question, Aurelio. Someone who is not, doesn't have the inclination towards music, or who doesn't understand music, what is that tip you would like to give them so that they can benefit at least from this field? Because there is so much sound can offer, like you rightly said. And how can one benefit when you're not really having that rhythm in your body? You know, like they say, you need a rhythm in your body to be able to appreciate dance and music, or be a dancer or a musician. So, what is that tip you would like to give? And how does one stand to really benefit and heal from this science?
Answer to it a little bit, because the first thing is, because you talk about those people who don't understand music.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of music. We don't need to understand it, we feel it. And you know, we feel it exactly through this. Because that's how we incarnate into this earth field, basically. We are harbored and cared for and have this amazing environment, fluid environment growing in the belly of the mother. And what we are exposed to, all of us, independent of our backgrounds, we're exposed to the heartbeat of the mother. So we are growing up in a rhythmic, pulsating environment. That's why 95% of the rhythms on the planet are in this straight 4-beat rhythm. Yeah, because we are all programmed from it. And the second thing, so we have rhythm. We are grown, we are born into rhythm. We are born from the rhythm, through the rhythm. And even in the birth, then, when in the birthing process, of course, the rhythm, the heartbeat of the mother speeds up. Or when the mother goes resting in the night, the heartbeat slows down. So we have even the feeling of the different layers of the speeds of rhythm. And then through the voice of the mother, because I've been in intrauterine research with some international capacities. It's a fascinating subject, and the listening sense is the first sense opening. So I don't accept when we say we are not musical beings, and we all, humanity, we are grown up in a field of pulsations and in the frequencies and harmonics of the mother's voice. And because we are so cerebral in the last hundreds of years of evolution, I think part of the shifting tide is that we're finding that middle ground between our brain and our body, and that middle ground is in the heart. And this is where music works. This is where that's why music doesn't need words. And as you said, everybody, that's the beauty. When we're doing seminars for people, we call it creative play, musical play, play shops with music, for people who said, no, I'm not a musician, or they had been pushed out of the choir in the school, they were not allowed to sing, and they are traumatized their whole life. It's so beautiful, you know, when you see these processes, how beautiful when we do simple, what we call elementary music, where everybody can participate. You know, like the popular drum circles. We have rhythm in us, each one of us. So I'm saying one entry is basically being with the hum, and the hum in your shower, the hum when the kitchen machine is running, the hum in your car. We can pick up on those ones, and they become our drones. And every mother can sing a lullaby to her baby. Because she's moved from her heart. She has so much love that she doesn't even think if she can sing or not. No? So we are inherently musical beings. We are programmed for harmony. That's an amazing recognition. We're not programmed for strife and competitions.
That's true.
Humans are programmed for coming together, for convergence, and we are programmed towards harmony. No?
That's right. That's right.
And
That's
then
right.
we
That's
have, how to say, so we have music inherent. You see it, you know, everybody, you play Bollywood song in India to somebody, everybody, you see how the people said, I'm not musical, but then you see how they're tapping the foot. So where's
That's
that one
right.
coming? No? So
That's
it's
right.
inherent to us.
Yeah.
So the first step is music is in our body. We also work with body percussion exercises. And then the next thing is the instruments which we are creating. One of our sentences in Svaram is to bring the joy of music and the healing touch of sound into everyone's hands and hearts. Yeah. So that's
Wow.
the gift of, I think, of our instruments. And see of it, I'm having here a string box. Anybody can do that. Okay, here the strings I have to tune, yeah? And then from there it goes into xylophones. I have here instruments, might be interesting for tuning.
So
Now
lovely.
everybody can handle a mallet and can play those instruments. And as simple as it is, as intricate are the frequencies in those instruments. For instance, in those instruments, we call them orbits. They are tuned to planetary frequencies. All the planets moving around the sun, we can bring them into the listening range, and they represent frequencies. Yeah. So that's the beauty. That's my kind of like my interest and the fun of it. We work with very simple, approachable instruments, which sometimes have very intricate and scientific backgrounds and content of it. Yeah. And the primal instrument of humanity, but I like also natural materials. You know, this is some material from a local plant, oleander plant, which is actually super poisonous, and it was used in the early days when I was here. People used it for suicide in love stories. And so we call this little instrument hope rattle. We said instead of killing each other, let's make music. This is from the traditional South Indian Palmyra palm tree. Yeah.
Oh,
For
wow.
instance, those instruments, as they look like toys, they might be the oldest surgical instruments of humanity, and that's what I experienced with the indigenous people. What are they are creating, just like we say, white noise, and letting the brain, basically confusing the brain so that the brain lets go and comes into an alpha state and possibly can go into deeper perception.
Wow. Wow.
And then from there, which anybody can do, I'm just picking up
So lovely, and I'm so grateful, Aurelio. You are here in our vicinity, in our country, and how you have managed to merge the East and the West so beautifully. I mean, this is such a blessing for planet Earth, for humanity, all of humanity. I just hope your word reaches each and every person in the world and every home. It's such a gift, such a gift. Thank you so much, Aurelio,
I think,
for your work, what you
Mahima.
do, for being on this show, and any last message which you'd like to give to our audience.
Yeah, actually, I want to, as I said that gift, I want to honor India. India has been such an amazing culture of tolerance, and you know, all the people coming together, and thousand different ways of approaching the mystery of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the experimentation with it, and it had this liberty. And I'm here partly also because we believe in the renaissance of India and in the place of India in the future of humanity.
Yeah.
When India gets and manifests its authentic Sanatana Dharma, it's the eternal truth, which is not even India's truth, it's the truth of humanity, the basic principles of our humanity, which are nourished through wisdom and compassion, basically. Yeah. And I'm feeling very blessed to be able to live and work here, because it's such an immense inspirational field. Not only, at the same time, we have to have our feet on the ground, because you know the circumstances in rural India and all the challenges and the difficulties India is facing. We have them right in our face, the difficulties, but we were promised actually in that way, Auroville, we are here also to find all the solutions to the human dilemmas and the problems. And that gives so much hope actually. We are here building the new together.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being on Shifting Tides and for sharing this wisdom and knowledge and your vast experience through your life. Thank you so much. Thank you.
To be continued. We stay in touch.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow, how enduring. What an amazing journey Aurelio has made. Having meandered and traveled through so many crevices of life, he has finally found his own inner paradise. Something we all need to imbibe. So many various explorations that helped him come to a point of his inner peace, inner calm, inner joy, inner wisdom, and inner love, which he is so willingly and generously now ready to offer to the world. We sign off now. We come back to you with yet another wonderful guest in our next episode. Till then, take care and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Bye for now. Thank you for watching Shifting Tides. Over the last 2 seasons, we have made a sincere attempt to bring to you amazing stories from people all over the world, to inspire you, to motivate you. And I'm sure they must have touched your lives in one way or another. If you wish to continuously getting inspired from these stories, please feel free to donate on the link below. Thank you for your continued support. God bless and bye.